Hey students, this is your professor on a rainy afternoon sitting on my porch with a little bit of an introduction to what is economic geography. I wish I had a simple answer for this. I suppose I should have a simple, clear definition that I make you memorize, but I don't really in anything I teach. I think part of the reason is that these are not simple topics, that there's a lot of overlap with other topics, as we'll learn about. These are topics that are constantly changing, and so on. But I think we can have a pretty good idea now, and especially, I hope, by the end of the course, roughly what we mean by the idea of economic geography and why we study it. Let's start out with the first word. What do we mean by economic, or what are economics? What is the study of economics? Your textbook, the introduction to your textbook, has a very simplistic definition, but I think it works. There are lots of definitions of economics out there dealing with scarce resources, etc., but I like the one your textbook uses, which is economics deals with how do we earn a living. And that's obviously a major preoccupation for all of us at the individual level and at the collective level. How does the United States earn a living how do we earn a living within the United States or within Mississippi, etc.? It begs a lot of questions. For example, why are some people particularly wealthy? Why are some people particularly struggling, even starving in some cases? Mostly not in the United States, happily, but in lots of countries around the world where people are malnourished, don't even have enough to eat, much less to thrive economically. Among the many other complications are not everything is expressed in money. Economics traditionally deals with money, deals with dollars or euros or other units of currency. And that's pretty convenient. You can measure it, you can add it, you can subtract it, you can compare countries and states, etc. But a lot of what happens that helps us to earn our living happens outside of the money economy. Traditionally in the United States, we think about if we have a wife or a house husband at home that may do a good bit of work but doesn't receive money for that. More commonly in other countries today, but still very much in the United States, there's a lot of children's work that is not compensated, where children work on a family farm, or children work in Pakistan putting shoes together, etc., are not compensated in money terms, or hardly compensated, even though they contribute to an economy. A large part of the economy of the world, and to some significant extent in the United States, is what we call the informal economy. An economy that's outside of the traditional economic system, where people are working what we sometimes call the black market. They may sell things, or of course you have drugs, you have prostitution, you have other things, but lots of legitimate activities, everything from fixing cars to selling things on street corners, etc. That is not taxed, it's not licensed, it's just people hustling to make a buck. And we see this right here in the U.S., we see it right here in the South, where people will pay other people under the table to do their gardening or do some construction work for them. It's not taxed, it's not regulated, it's just earning a living. There's lots of barter that takes place. It takes place again here, it takes place lots in the United States. There are countries like Zimbabwe and other places where the financial system is almost meaningless, and people make their living by bartering goods, where you have almost no workable currency. In some places, you may trade somebody a repair on their car or a carburetor for their truck in exchange for 8 loaves of bread or something along those lines. So, economics itself, complicated topic, but we have a rough idea of what it means. So what is economic geography then? And that has to do with why, for example, are some places, people in some places, especially wealthy? Why are people in some places especially struggling? And we know this intuitively. Here in Mississippi, we're in a unique position because we're in both. We're situated in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but within one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we're one of the poorest states in the world, or one of the poorest states in the United States. And even within Mississippi, we have relatively poor counties, relatively wealthy counties. Why is that? Why do things vary so much from place to place? What determines that? Or on the other hand, how do places affect economics? Traditionally, characteristics of places, like do you have access to river or ocean ports, had a big effect on whether a city thrived or it did not. So many of our biggest cities in the United States, most of our biggest cities in the United States evolved as ports, either along, say, the Mississippi River, such as New Orleans or St. Louis, or as ocean ports, New York City, Miami, Los Angeles, etc. Not that many that did not have a significant port beginning. Of course, nowadays, airports. One of the reasons Atlanta is as dominant a city as it is in the United States is because of its airport. Currently the busiest airport in the United States. I don't know to what extent this is true, but people say that Birmingham had the opportunity to be the Delta airline hub and dropped the ball on it. Atlanta got it. Its airport evolved and thrived largely as a result that it was the Delta hub, and now it's huge, and Atlanta is huge. And some people would argue this is a significant reason why Birmingham is not nearly as important as Atlanta is today. Influence of highways. We see this across Mississippi, where certain communities have thrived in part because of they are on major highways. Other communities have died because they are not near major highways. Universities are very important determinants of community growth, whether a community has a university or not. Climate, that determines your ability to have agriculture. Your proximity to other similar businesses. We'll talk more about this, but you've observed this informally, where you've probably seen, if you've gone car shopping, where you tend to have a lot of car dealerships clustered in one particular area of a city. Why is that the case? How does geography determine that? It's not because of the climate or access to a port, but there is something about this effect of similar businesses clustering close to each other. It seems odd. You'd think maybe they'd want to get away from their competition, but there are a lot of advantages in being close by. How is economic geography changing? There are lots of factors that are changing the economic geography of the United States, of Mississippi, the world, and a lot of it we don't understand very well. How is the internet changing things? There were all these predictions a decade or so ago that because of the internet, economic geography was dead, that people could live and work wherever they wanted. You could live in Death Valley or on a mountaintop or whatever you want and work for a company anywhere you want. And that proved not to be true. And we'll talk about that later on. It has something to do with this idea of businesses tending to be clustered together, but it really has not had a gigantic effect in terms of where most people live, although it has affected certain industries, of course, such as computer industry in Silicon Valley and others. Automation. robots, driverless cars, drones. What effect are those going to have, if any? Huge effect? No effect? Minor effect? Clusters in terms of, as we just talked about, but also entertainment, what we call the service industry. When we talk about companies clustering together, it's not just retail dealerships or manufacturing, but can also be things like casinos. Tend to be very tightly clustered together in certain places, like the Mississippi Gulf Coast or Las Vegas. Other entertainment industries, the movie industry, etc. So how are these changing? What are some of the new factors in economic geography? Economic development, I would say, is when we start trying to intervene, when we start trying to do something, when we start trying to create jobs or new ways of for people to earn a living in a particular place. And this is my own primary field of research, is studying how this happens, whether in Mississippi or whether in the developing countries of the developing world. What can we do to try to assist people to earn a living in places where they may want to live? We'll talk more about that in this class. As I've already alluded, there are lots of scales of economic geography, and we're going to span all of those scales here in this class. By scale, I mean on a map, big or small. We'll talk about some aspects of the world economy, about how we are globalized as an economy, and we always have been. There have always been, to some extent, exports and imports. Going back thousands of years, there was trade from place to place. But this has accelerated in the past few decades, far beyond what we once had, where exports of whether automobiles or wheat was kind of a minor sideshow compared to selling goods within the United States. Now it's a very huge part of our economy, selling goods, buying goods, and not just hard goods either, selling services. We'll talk about intellectual capital, the value of brands, of copyrights, the value of ideas, which are of huge international trade value, and ways that we try to protect that. We'll talk about economic geography within the United States, here within Mississippi, and even within communities. I believe there's a distinctive economic geography within Hattiesburg, or say within your own home community. And you probably recognize that there are more affluent parts of town. There are poorer parts of town. There are parts of town where you find retail. There are parts of town where you find other aspects of economic activity. So we'll talk about things at all these scales, from the big down world all the way down to neighborhoods. Inevitably, there's going to be some overlap with some of my other classes, and some of you have had me for other classes, so bear with me. I've only got so much to say, only so many sermons, but it's also the nature of the topic. There's a lot of overlap between economic geography and some of the things we talk about in just basic Geography 101. Also my political geography class or my sustainable planning and development class. So bear with me, there will be a little bit of repetition, some overlap, but I hope it'll also help you see how these different parts fit together. So let's work together. Let's not only try to figure out exactly what this economic geography thing is, but let's see how we can continue to expand its dimensions and continue to expand our understanding of what it is.